Hey, I'm Andrew with 10-Minute Therapy, and in today's video, we are going to dive into the topic of bottom-up anxiety. In last week's video, we examined top-down anxiety, and so today's video is sort of a follow-up explaining a different origin point and a different way in which anxiety can enter the brain. So, without further ado, let's start the clock. We'll get right to it. So in last week's video, we looked at what's called top-down anxiety. And just to give you a quick recap, top-down anxiety is a form of anxiety originating from the top of our brain, our frontal cortex, which is essentially our thinking. And what we examined in that video is that in top-down anxiety, it's actually our very thoughts, our thinking, which then triggers the amygdala fight or flight response. And so it's a form of anxiety that starts in my thoughts and my thought processes and is triggered by those thought processes. But for today's video, we're going to look at essentially its opposite form, what we call bottom-up anxiety. And so rather than dive into a scientific explanation or definitions of bottom-up anxiety, I thought it might be helpful if we approach this lesson from a case study perspective. That is, to create a case study and walk through an understanding of what bottom-up anxiety is. And so for our case study today, we're going to create a character named Sarah. And Sarah is an 18-year-old young lady who's recently obtained her driver's license, has been driving for several months now, lives a pretty normal life for a teenage girl. She goes to school, she has a good social life, she participates in extracurricular activities, has a pretty good life at home. And one day, Sarah is driving down the highway when she hears a song on the radio that she recognizes. And so, as anyone would do, Sarah reaches to the radio knob and turns up the volume. The song she recognizes is an old one, a song she hadn't heard in a long time, something her parents had introduced to her. It's a song that actually triggers some happy memories and positive responses within her as she turns the volume up and enjoys the music. But unbeknownst to Sarah, as she begins to listen to this song, the car in front of her begins to swerve violently, avoiding an object in the road. And Sarah, like any young driver, reaches for the steering wheel, jerks it, and turns to avoid hitting the car, but in the meantime causes a near fatal accident in which she rolls her car several times over. Now, Sarah, in this situation, two things happen. Number one, there are parts of this memory that she can't quite remember. They appear almost as flashes or as a blur to her. Number two, other parts of this memory of this accident are now deeply ingrained in her mind. She can vividly remember waking up from having lost consciousness. She can remember the sound of breaking glass. She can remember the sound of sirens, the sound of people panicking, trying to help her, some of the smells, the car engine, smoke. She can remember some of the taste, even the taste of blood in her mouth. Sarah survives the accident, but is somewhat traumatized by the events, and so at the recommendation of her family and some doctors, she attends some counseling for several sessions to work through some of the nightmares, recurring memories she has, until she feels like her life returns to normal. And so Sarah goes on with her life. But about 6 months after this accident, something happens. Sarah is in the car, driving once again. And in that moment, she hears that same song that she heard at the time of the accident. A song that previously introduced happy memories and even the sensation of joy and happiness in her. But this time, when that song plays, something happens almost instantaneously inside of her. She notices that her heart begins to race and beat faster and faster. She notices that her breathing becomes very shallow and very quick. She notices a sensation in her legs as adrenaline starts coursing through, and she feels very tense and feels her blood pressure increasing. She feels like her stomach gets sick, almost as if she's about to throw up. And in that moment, what is happening in Sarah's body is what we know to be a panic attack. And so in this imagined scenario, with this made up character named Sarah, what we've just experienced, what we've just heard, is a form of bottom up anxiety. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, it sounds a little bit like PTSD or post traumatic stress disorder. And in some way, shape, or form, you might be partially correct. But a more accurate explanation is that Sarah is experiencing bottom up anxiety. What makes bottom up anxiety so interesting is that it is completely and radically different in its approach from top down anxiety. In top down anxiety, we examine that my own thinking triggers the amygdala response. But in this case that we've examined, this song that Sarah hears on the radio, this song is a positive song. It's one that's connected to happy memories in her life, her family, and joy. And yet, once the song played at the time of this near fatal accident, something very different happens the next time she hears it. It triggers a panic attack. If top-down anxiety is triggered by my very thinking, stemming through the brain to the amygdala response, then bottom-up anxiety comes very differently. In fact, it often has nothing to do with one's thinking. Bottom-up anxiety, in this case, the song that Sarah heard should have triggered a happy memory, a pleasant response, maybe even joy. And yet now, something as innocuous as a sound, something as harmless as the sound of this song, has now triggered a full-on panic attack for the individual in question. So the question is why? Why does that happen? To answer this, we need to examine what we call associations. Our brains, your brain, my brain, do this amazing thing where they make strong associations. Our brains connect two things together. Previous to Sarah's accident, the song that she heard on the radio was paired with pleasant, positive, happy, joyful memories. And so just hearing the sound of this song triggered something very joyful and positive inside of her. But in the moment of her accident, her brain did what many of our brains do, and it took the sound of the music, which had nothing to do with the near fatal accident, and it paired it with the trauma of the accident, how she felt in that moment when her full-on fight or flight response was triggered in a moment of actual danger. And these two things are now paired together. We talked previously about how the amygdala doesn't always get the information right. Like a smoke detector that's firing on all cylinders and alarming very loudly because you've burnt food. The smoke detector doesn't know that burnt food isn't a dangerous house fire. And in the same way, Sarah's amygdala is responding because it believes she's in danger because the last time it heard this sound, something dangerous occurred and her life truly was threatened. But now her amygdala doesn't know the difference between a song which is harmless and maybe even good, and this near fatal accident that almost claimed her life. And so in bottom-up anxiety, what we're suggesting is that rather than anxiety triggering from my thoughts down to my amygdala, that actually it's coming up. And so you have to think, okay, well, what's below the brain? What comes up into my brain since the amygdala is already pretty far down in our brain? And the answer is all of your sensory information. Right? Our spinal column carries all sensory information up into our brains. Sight, sounds, taste, touch, smell, all these inputs come into the brain, and in that bottom part of the brain, they go through what's called the thalamus, and the thalamus acts like a traffic cop that's pointing people in different directions, and it takes all these signals and tells them where to go. But that amygdala is still watching, it's still listening, and it's still waiting. And when it determines that something might be a threat, it fires. And in this case, in Sarah's example, this song has been paired with, connected to, and associated with a very traumatic memory. And so even though a song is not harmful to me, and it does not indicate danger, maybe my amygdala doesn't know the difference. This bottom-up anxiety we do associate with PTSD, but it can also be caused just by past experiences and traumas. The idea is that it's not triggering from my thinking, but some outside sensory information that my brain is receiving and interpreting as associated with a dangerous event. The question then becomes, what if I experience something like that? What do I do? Number one, please hear me. If you have experienced bottom-up anxiety in any way, shape, or form, talk to a counselor. This is a very treatable form of anxiety that we can actually help individuals walk through, and we can help the brain no longer connect and associate these two things together. In a short, we would be looking at something called exposure, that essentially we need to help the brain recognize this song, in Sarah's case, it's not harmful, it's not dangerous, and I don't need to fear it. And by exposing the brain back to this innocuous stimuli, a sound, a sight, a taste, a touch, a smell, we can help the brain recognize that these two things no longer need to be connected, a song with danger. Well, as I say every time, if something you've heard today sounds familiar, if it sounds like something you've walked through, my recommendation is talk to a counselor. Talk to someone, walk through this with them. You don't have to live in a place of fear, and you don't have to live in a place where your amygdala response is firing off over something that is not dangerous to you. As you can see, I've gone way over on my time, so I'm going to stop, and I'm going to say, please come back next time. We're going to continue and wrap up actually our series on anxiety by examining some different anxiety disorders in our next video and how they look and play out. But in the meantime, I'm Andrew with 10 Minute Therapy. God bless.